and I'm going to share my screen now. And first, real quick, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath from your diaphragm too. Don't, not your chest, from your diaphragm. Diaphragm is this part right here, okay? This part. Okay, what the breath does is it releases cortisol. A deep breath, not a shallow breath, but what a deep breath does is it releases cortisol. It lowers the amount of cortisol. It reduces your tension in your body, and this tension in your body can occur when you see something that is discomforting. And moments like these in algorithms, when I give you a difficult problem, right, for 80% of you, this is going to be a difficult problem to solve. When that happens, most humans are wired to go into fight or flight. Fight or flight is like a stress response. Okay, it's a stress response. What the stress response does is it constricts your vessels. I was actually gonna be I was gonna go to med school and stuff, but I decided I couldn't look at blood. I just got sick, so I decided to learn how to code. So I got a bunch of biology knowledge, and I just want to share that in terms of learning. What happens when you're stressed out and you have a lot of cortisol is your blood vessels constrict. It actually increases your blood pressure because they're constricted. So now there's more, all that blood has less space to move through. It reduces your brain capacity and your ability to learn, right? So I know these can cause stressful things. Okay, so yeah. So as you are learning these things, that stress is normal. That stress is normal. Don't try to resist it, but just take a deep breath to allow that stress to naturally dissipate. The stress will naturally dissipate as you take these deep breaths. These deep breaths will help you to center yourself, and also it'll help you to be aware of the limiting beliefs that come into your head from a result of conditioning. These limiting beliefs are beliefs that come in when I give you an algorithm like this, and a thought comes in like, oh, this is too hard. Am I too stupid? I think I'm too stupid. Am I dumb? I think I'm dumb. Oh, I can't solve this. How am I ever going to be successful at this? All these beliefs are all related to self-doubt and fear. When you're stressed out, the way that the brain works is memory is state dependent. When I say memory is state dependent, I mean that if you were in a really good mood and someone asked you to recall moments from your life, you'd recall moments from your life that resonated to the emotion you're currently feeling. So if you're feeling really good, you'd think of all the good times in your life. Like, oh yeah, I had all that. Now, if you're feeling really stressed out, and if you're feeling like you're not good enough, if you're feeling like you're not smart enough, you're not fast enough, you're not intelligent enough, you're not talented enough, if you're feeling these limiting beliefs, if you're feeling the feelings related to these limiting beliefs, you're going to remember all the times in your life that you failed, all the times in your life that you struggled, all the times that in your life that you weren't good enough, you weren't smart enough, or you thought that you weren't smart enough, or you thought that you weren't good enough. So all these thoughts are in the past and future, and these thoughts are not real. Take a breath in this present moment when you get stressed out. Take a deep breath. Know that you are enough. You are good enough. You are smart enough. Know that the reason that this is difficult, this may even be painful to think of problems like this. Even going through those assignments from the fundamentals section may have been painful. Like it may actually have hurt your brain from thinking like that. That doesn't mean you're stupid. That doesn't mean you're slow. That doesn't mean you're incompetent. It just means that you haven't worked out that muscle, that particular muscle, right? Intelligence isn't just that particular muscle. Intelligence is so vast. You cannot judge a fish by its ability to swim, unless it's a flying fish, then you can. But not all fishes are flying fishes, right? So you cannot judge a fish by its ability to fly. You cannot judge a fish by its ability to fly, because a fish hasn't worked out those flying skills, right? Now, I cannot judge, you cannot judge yourself. No one can judge you for your ability to do algorithms if you haven't done algorithms at all in your life up until like 2 weeks ago when you started the boot camp. You cannot judge yourself for it. So those thoughts are based off of fear. Okay. Fear stands for false evidence, okay? False evidence appearing real, okay? And fail stands for first attempt in learning, okay? Now, the first step you can do when you catch yourself in that pattern, that negative loop, take a deep breath from your diaphragm and give some love to yourself, saying, hey, this is difficult, and like anyone, I will understand this given the time and repetition and effort. That's it. And then you work through it, and you just focus back onto the problem. And anytime a thought comes back in to give you some limiting beliefs about yourself, to judge yourself, deep breath again, self-love, back to the problem. Okay, deep breath, self-love, back to the problem. So I know that was a little off topic, but I figured I would want to share that. That has helped me in my life as well. So I just wanted to share that. I would feel really selfish if I didn't share that. Okay, cool. So now let's go to without further ado, let's go to this problem that we got, right? Problem. We're just problem solvers, right? We're building our problem solving skills. If we didn't solve the problem that we were assigned that day, that's okay. We made the effort to, we collaborated with people in our group. And the reason I put you in random groups for algorithms is because you might get paired up with someone that's really good with algorithms, and then you might not be as experienced with that left brain thinking as they are, right? Notice how I didn't say you might not be as smart as them. I didn't say that, because that doesn't reflect your intelligence. I said you haven't been as experienced in practicing left brain thinking as that person, right? You might have more right brain thinking. That's intelligence. Intelligence isn't just one side, right? Picasso, Mozart, right brain, right? Or maybe left brain. I don't know, but I actually don't know. I have no clue. But here we go. So the reason I paired you up with them because let's say they come up with some solutions, because I saw some solutions from some students that were different than mine that would work. And now it benefits both sides now. It benefits the person that's more experienced and the person that's less experienced. Why? Because the person that's more experienced can now have someone that can ask them questions and then that person that's more experienced now can practice explaining their logic as if it's an interview. So you get some interview practice, because guess what they're going to do in an interview? They're going to say, hey, could you explain what you just did as if you're teaching it to me? Then you get to practice that. You learn 100% of what you teach. You learn 70% of what you do. You learn 10% of what you see. You just watch one of my videos, you just learn 10% of that video, right? Now you actually do an assignment after watching that video, then you learn 70%. And then you explain what you just did to someone. You try to teach what you just did. You learn 100%. So that gives the people that are ahead and that solve algorithms relatively quickly, that experience to do that, right? It also really improves your communication skills for interviews. And the people that have a lot of questions in terms of how'd you get to that solution? How'd you come up with that on your own? Now you have someone to ask that to, right? Now you have someone to ask that to, and that person has an opportunity to explain it to you. So that's for algorithms. I'm going to continue with the random groups. And then for rest of the day, groups that you prefer, so that you guys can have fun while, learning and working. And guess what? During these random pairing of algorithm groups, you might end up making a bond with someone that you otherwise wouldn't have made a bond with if you stuck to the same group the whole time. So I want to open those doors. I want to make sure those doors stay open. Cool. But now without further ado, let's go to the problem. Okay, so deep breath, right? I take deep breaths too, even after a bunch of words. All right. this function is designed right now to accept a string as an input, right? So if I were to call the function and I pass in this string, right? This string would actually be over here, right? It would be stored into this variable. Now, when we look at this, let's solve it so that if there's a uneven amount like this, right? If I were to look at this, if you were the function, now, if you were the function and someone gave you this string, would you return true or false for the parentheses being valid?
False.
False, right? You'd return false. And you'd know to return false, right? Without any coding, you'd say, hey, okay, you're going through the string, you're looking to see if any characters are a parentheses, like either you're looking for opening and closing parentheses, right? Anything that's an open parentheses, anything that's a closing parentheses, right? If I see the letter N, am I concerned with the letter N?
No.
No, I'm not, right? But then I see an open parentheses. Okay. Then I am concerned with that. I'm gonna say, okay, there's an open parentheses. I'll keep track of that. Okay, so that means that there's an open parentheses. And then I see another open parentheses. Oh, okay, now I see two open parentheses. So maybe I'm keeping count of how many parentheses that are open that I see. And then I see a closed parentheses. Oh, that's one closed parentheses and that's two open parentheses, right? So far. I see number 3 that has nothing to do with parentheses, so I don't, that doesn't matter. And then I'm at the end of my string. So by the time I get to the end of my string, I know how many open parentheses I have and how many closed parentheses I have, right? So maybe something like go through the string and keep track of number of, hold on, let me move this, number of open and number of close parens, okay? Close parens. Okay. So after I do that, right? After getting the totals, when I say totals, I mean the total number of open and the total number of closed. Totals. Compare the total open versus total close, right? And if the total open is not equal to the so if the total open is not equal to the total amount of closing, like in this case, right, it would return true or false.
False.
Awesome, cool. So let's make it do that, right? And that's not necessarily going to solve for a situation where it's like this. This should also return false, though, right? But there's there's one closed and one open, right? So there's even amount. So this logic wouldn't solve all the cases. It would solve only cases like this, right? But it wouldn't solve a case where there's an opening one that comes after a closing one, right? Opening one that comes after a closing one. So, but let's not worry about this case right now. Let's make this function, it doesn't, when we build it, let's make it like a minimum viable product, right? It's going to at least work for these cases where it's uneven amounts, right? That's like half the number of cases, right? It's going to at least solve for any situation like this. And then we're going to refactor the code. When I say refactor the code, we're modifying the code. So it also works for these conditions, okay? But first, let's just make it work so it works for these conditions, okay? And this is our pseudocode to do that, okay? So in order to go through the string, what can I do to go through each and every character in the string? For loop, okay. For I in range. And I could say start at index 0, right? And I saw some of you guys write stuff like 0 without a comma here. There was no comma right here, and you just wrote down len of, which variable will represent the string that we get as an input in this function? And keep in mind, parameters are variables too. What is going to represent the string that we get as an input?
Input string.
Input string. Cool. And I named it input string, so it, you know, is easy to recognize. Cool. Input string. We go through the length of this input string, right? Because when I pass in this string, it'll be stored in input string. So we're going to go through whatever the length of the input string is. And I saw some of you guys missing a comma here, right? Some simple, small syntax errors, right? So be very careful when you type, okay? Be very aware of what you're typing, right? There's the first value. It's going to start at 0, right? And then the second value is how long it's going to keep going. And third value is the incrementer, right? So I'm saying increment by 1. Why am I incrementing by 1? Well, am I looking at each index one by one, going from one index to the next index?
Mm-hmm.
I am. So it's incrementing by 1, right? Now, if it's going to start at index 0 and if it's going to increment by 1, do I need to include them? Can it still work without including them?
Yeah, I'll work without.
Yep, cool. So the default values, if you only put in one thing, that one thing will represent the stop value. So it's going to stop at this number, whatever the length of the string is. So when I reaches this number, it's going to stop. But by default, it's going to start at 0. And by default, I is going to increment by 1. Right? Now, if you don't want I to start at 0, then you need to specify it, right? And if you don't want it to increment by 1, then you need to specify it, right? But otherwise, you don't need to. So I can just leave it like this. But just to be more explicit, I know this is like only day 3. I want to make it as explicit as possible. Cool. When I say explicit, I mean as detailed as possible. Okay, cool. So, or as obvious as possible. So I is going to represent an index number, right? Like 0. So some string at index 0 will give me what in this case? Like input string at index 0 is like n, right? But I want to say if input string at index I, meaning at the current location that we're in, where I is, right? If it's equal to an open parentheses, right? Can I just do this, or do I need to put it inside of a quote?
Inside of a quote.
Inside of quotes, right? Because what are these things? Each one of these are strings, right? And all of these are strings combined into one big string right here. So each one of these characters is a string. This first character is a string containing n, right? But I'm not concerned with n or anything else. I'm just concerned with parentheses. So if the input string at index I is a open parentheses, then, well, what are we going to do? We're going to keep track of the number of open and number of close. Well, I don't have anything to keep track of number of open and number of close with. So maybe I need to create a variable. So before the for loop starts, maybe I'll create a variable where, number of open, right? Let's call it open count is equal to 0. Closed count is equal to 0. And anytime I see an opening one, I'm going to increase open count by 1. And just like I did that with anything that I see that's open, if I see anything that's a closed parentheses, I'm going to do close count. I'm going to increase close count by 1. Right? So by the time the for loop is done, I'll have in these two variables, I'll have the total count of opening and closing. And then after the for loop is done, meaning not inside of this for loop, right? This is right now my cursor is inside of the for loop. If I unindent back 1, I'm not inside the for loop anymore. So I'm saying, hey, after the for loop is done, it should have calculated the total open count and total close count. So then I can compare it. If open count does not equal to closed count, then return false. Else, return true, right? So let's see if that works for this situation. And then after we test it, I'm gonna stop and ask for questions, and then we're gonna solve for this other situation. where this one, okay? But right now we're just gonna make it if it's uneven amount. So right now it's uneven amount, right? It should return something. But if I don't have a print here, right, it's not gonna print anything to a terminal. Actually, let me show that one more time. I really wanna show that because I saw some students fumble with that. What is this? Really? Get the heck out of here. Okay. Okay, cool. So if I were to run it, let me clear my terminal first. Okay, it doesn't print anything. Why does it not print anything?
You're returning, not printing, so there's nothing variable grabbing the return.
Yep, that's true. And there's no, have I told the computer to print? Will the computer only print if I tell it to print? Right? The computer will only print if I tell it to print. Right? It's not just gonna all of a sudden be like, yo, I'm printing. Like, screw what you say, I'm just gonna print. I'm the computer, I do my things. No, computer's not gonna do that. It's only gonna print if I tell it to print. So I need to tell it to print. There's not a single line in there where I told it to print. If I tell it to print this function call, it's gonna print whatever this function returns. Because the value of a function is whatever it what?
Returns.
It returns. Nice, cool. The value of a function is whatever it returns. So it's printing this value. What is the value of this? Well, what is this? It's a function. What is the value of a function? It's whatever it returns. What is this gonna return? Well, let's see.
True or false?
Yep, it's gonna, in this case, it's gonna return false. So with this input, it's gonna return false, right? So that's good, it works for this case, right? And if I were to add another closing parentheses, would this be valid or invalid?
That would be valid.
Valid, right? There's opening and closing, right? There's, okay, cool. Okay, cool. It says true. So that works for that situation, right? But what about a situation like this? Well, there's even amount of opening and closing, right? There's 1, 2 closing, and then 2 opening. So there's an even amount of that, but it closes before it opens. So would this be valid or invalid?
In this case, it would be invalid.
Invalid. Okay, so it should return what?
False.
False, right?
Oh, true.
Okay, it still returns true, right? Still returns true. Because right now it's only solving for if opening count is not equal to close count, right? Well, opening count and close count, are they equal? Is there equal number of opening and equal number of closing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, right?
They're just not.
So, but we haven't solved it for if the opening comes after closing. Like if the close comes before the open at any point, then it's invalid as well, right? Okay. So in order to check that, right? Now, here's a good question. As I'm going through it, do I have to go through this whole string to figure out that an open came before a close, or can I figure that out as I'm going through the string?
It's going through.
As I'm going through, right? Like, did I have to go all the way to the end to realize, oh, open came before a closing one? Did I have to get all the way here? Or did I realize it as soon as I saw opening come before a closing one? Right? Awesome, cool. And in terms of the total amount of opening and close, right? Did I have to go through the whole string to get the total?
Yeah.
Yes, right?
No, you can check right under the second, right under the if statement, checking for that's about the closed one.
Yeah, well, we can, exactly. Yeah, I was getting to that, but I just wanted to baby step the class towards that.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, so in order to find the total amount of opening and close, right? Notice how we checked if open and close did we check that in the for loop or outside the for loop? Is this inside the for loop or outside the for loop?
Outside.
Outside, right? So that means after we went through this whole thing, because the for loop went through each and every character in the string, right? After that, then we know the total, right? We have to check the whole thing to find out the total amount of opening and closing. But in order just to find out if a closed one comes before, we can find it before the for loop ends. So while we're for looping, if at any point closed count is greater than open count, right? Meaning that right here, if I'm the for loop and I go through this, let's go through this, right? Actually, hold on. I need to have it return. If at any point closed count is greater than the open count, I'm gonna return false. Okay. Let's just see if this works actually real quick, and I'm gonna explain how that works. Cool. If it returns false, right? Oh, and one other thing. I saw some people do this. Like let's say I wanted it to return hello or something, right? Or not, okay, not hello. Let's say I like edited my code and I'm like, oops, no, I didn't mean to return hello. I meant it to return false, right? And then I try to run the file. Wait, hold on. Return. Like, let's say I made like a typo or something, or you know, something, you know, or then I fixed up my code, right? And then I try to return it, right? And it's not giving me the output that I wanted. Okay, some of you guys are forgetting to save your files. Okay, you see this circle right here? Okay, remember to save your files. That's one thing. I saw that in a couple of groups today, so I just wanted to really remind you guys to, you know, save your files. And okay, cool. So it works, right? It works. It returns false now. And even though there's an even amount of opening and even amount of closing, the closing one comes before opening. So what's happening in this case, right? And one good place I would recommend to put your code in is Python Tutor, but sometimes it has some bugs. But let's check out. Let's go through this part right now. This is the string that I pass in, right? So the value of input string in this function, the value of input string will be the string that I passed in, right? Because when I call ParensValid. Okay. And then open count is 0, close count is 0. Okay, cool. Okay, and let me just put that here. Open count equals to 0 equals 0. Let's just keep track of our variables, right? Open count is 0, close count is 0 when we run this function. And then for I in range, okay, and I set up my for loop with these parameters, right? Or these arguments. So that means I is gonna start at which number? In this case?
0.
0, okay, so let's just log that. I is equal to 0, okay. And it's gonna keep going as long as I reaches the length of input string, right? When I hits whatever the length is, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I reaches 4, it's no longer gonna do this for loop. But until I reaches 4, it's gonna keep doing this for loop. And I is gonna increment by 1, okay, cool. So it goes to this if statement. If input string at index I, input string, what is input string? Well, input string is, this input string in this case, what would be this, right? Okay, input string is this. Input string at index I. What is I? I is 0. So input string at index I. Which character is that? Is it going to hit this if statement?
No.
No, right? Because, okay, cool. What about this one? Is it going to hit this if statement?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. So then what happens if it hits this if statement?
Starts counting.
What starts counting?
Close count. I mean,
Yeah, close count starts, it increases by what?
1.
By 1, okay. So when we say it, we got to be more specific, right? Be more specific with your words when you talk to yourself as well, because that'll kind of help you to narrow down things. So instead of it just starts counting, we're just going to say close counts, the number of, the close count increases by 1, right? Because when you say that, it's easier to translate that into code. When you just say it starts counting, it's like, how do you put that into code? It starts counting, right? But close count increases by 1. So close count increases by 1. Okay, cool. And then does this if statement hit?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, good. And sometimes I like to phrase my questions in a way to try to like throw you off a little bit by using voice tonality. I'll be like, oh, and does this if statement hit? Like as if it's not gonna hit. I'm be like, oh, does this if statement hit then? I mean, this hit. So since this if statement hit, is this one gonna hit? And then sometimes people would be like, based on my voice tonality, they'd be like, oh no. But I try to do that to kind of make you think more, okay? So yeah, it does hit though. Close count is greater than open count, right? Close count is greater than open count. So if any points during the for loop, right? This is part of the for loop. While we're in the for loop, then it's gonna return false if the close count is greater than the open count. Cool, and that's how that works. If it was even amounts, right? If it was like this, if it was uneven amounts, in the first iteration, right? Like if our input string was this, right? In this case, like this, then open count is this 0. Which if statement would it hit in the first iteration? Line 7, line 9?
7.
Line 7. Cool. So then open count goes up 1. And then is it gonna hit this one?
No.
Nope. And is close count greater than open count?
No.
Nope. And then is this the last line in the for loop?
Yes.
Okay, so then it goes back into this part to see whether to this part, this third number, and it increases I by 1. I is now 1. Okay, I is now 1. And then it evaluates, has I reached this number yet? Length of input string. What is the length of input string? It's 3, right? Has I reached 3 yet? No, it has not. So then we can continue. If I reaches this number or it gets past it, then we can no longer do the for loop. But I has not reached that. And now I is 1 now, right? Which if statement is going to hit? Line 7 or line 9? 7, right?
9.
Line 9?
Third one? For the third one?
No. Okay, we just incremented I, right? I is now 1, right?
Yes.
Did you follow up to the point where I increments?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I thought we were returning back for the third close bracket.
Nope. I is 1. So which index
Okay,
is which index are
7.
we at? We're in this one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Gonna run the
so-
first if statement.
Yeah. The
So it's
first.
gonna hit the first if statement. Just wanted to make sure that everyone's clear that it hits the first if statement. If that doesn't make sense, you have to hit me up one-on-one after this lecture.
No, I got that. Yeah.
Okay. So it hits this one, and then what if it hits that one? What happens?
Open
It's to the count.
Open count increases by 1, right? So now it's 2.
Mm.
Okay. And then it's not gonna hit this one, right? And close count is not greater than open count. Cool. And then is this the last line in the for loop?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So then it goes and does what?
Goes to the
It
next
goes
one.
Another
It goes to the incrementer and increments
I by 1.
I by 1.
I by 1.
Cool. And then after it increments, what part does it check in here?
7.
The length.
Oh, the length of it.
It checks the middle
Length
to
of the string.
see if we're even allowed to continue the for loop after we increment, right? After we increment, we check to see if we're even allowed to run that for loop again. Okay. Has I reached this number yet?
No.
No, right? Length of input string is 3, I is 2, right? And it has not passed it either. So cool. So then we can go do the for loop. Which if statement is gonna hit? Line 7 or line 9? If I is 2 now.
7.
9.
9.
So okay, so I heard some 7, I heard some 9. So if I is index 2, right, and input string is this, what's that index 2? This is index 0,
Third.
this is index 1, and this is index 2 right here,
Oh,
right? So is that an open or a closed parentheses?
closed.
Closed, okay, so would it hit, so does this look like an open or closed?
Open.
Okay, so would it hit this one?
No.
no.
No, right, it would hit line 9.
Mhm.
Okay, hopefully that makes sense, that part. So then it would hit this one, and if it hits that one, it would increase close count by 1, right? So now it increases close count by 1. And then is close count greater than open count?
No.
It's right here. It's not, right?
Close.
No.
It's not, right?
Close.
Close count, what is that? It's 1, right? Open count is 2.
All right.
1 is not greater than 2,
Mhm.
right? So it's not, is it gonna hit this if statement then?
No.
No.
Good. Whew, okay, good. And then so that means okay. Then this is this the last line of the for loop?
Yes.
Mm,
Yes. Okay. And then it goes to the incrementer. Increments I by 1. I is now 3. And then it checks, what part does it check in this for loop next after it increments?
the length.
The input length of the input string.
Right? The middle number, right? The stop, this is the stop number, like when the for loop should stop. So
Yeah.
has I reached the length of the input string or gotten past it?
It got past it.
Okay, well, it reached it or has gotten past it, right? It's one of those, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely reached it because the length of input string is 3 and I is 3, so it's reached it. So if it's reached this number, if I has reached this number or has gotten past it, then can we continue the for loop anymore?
No.
No.
No, right? So then we can't do any of this code inside the for loop. We're done with this for loop. What's the next line of code it runs?
If open count.
If open count is not equal to close count.
Okay, and is it going to hit this if statement?
Yes.
Good, because open count is 2 and close count is 1. They're not equal.
Mhm.
So then it's going to return false, and that's why we get false. If they were equal, it would return true.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Any questions on this? I'm gonna send you guys an answer.
Is it necessary to have that if close count is greater than the open count? Wouldn't it work the same way without it?
Okay, so this part, right? We explained that in situations like this, where the close comes before opening.
Oh, okay.
Remember that situation?
Yeah.
Do they have equal amount of opening and closing?
Yeah.
They do, right? So it wouldn't return false, it would return true if we didn't have this. But while we're going through the for loop, right? While we're going through the for loop, if at any point close count is greater than open count, that means a closed parentheses came before open parentheses.
Oh, okay. So you're just trying to verify it comes in order.
Yes, that's for that part. This part right here. Okay. Because while we're going through it, like we don't have to go through the whole list or the whole string in order to figure out that this came in prematurely,
Yeah.
right? So that means while we're doing the for loop, we have that check. If at any point close count is greater than open count.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay, cool. Cool. Let's take a 15-minute break. We'll meet back here at 45. Okay, for the lecture on OOP. I'm gonna stop the screen share and stop the recording. Get up, stretch, and do your thing. Where do you get the 0 from in variables open count? Okay, someone asked me a question. Where do you get the 0 from in variables open count and close count? So you're asking about these. Where did I come up with 0? Okay, so we're gonna start counting at a certain number, right? When I see something, I count 1. I add 1 to it, right? I add 1 to what? 0, right? Does that make sense? Why we start at 0?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll be back in like 15 minutes. I'll see you guys at 11:45 Eastern Time, 10:45 Central Time.